The first thing people remember about that morning in Grand Central isn't the trains or the announcements, or the rush of 1,000 lives colliding and sliding past each other like rain on glass. It's the moment a woman started to come apart on a bench in plain sight, and the world treated it like background noise. Because New York has a way of teaching you to look through pain, as if pain is just another advertisement you can ignore. And Paige Ross had dressed for that kind of invisibility on purpose: old jeans, thrift store coat, hair yanked into a messy ponytail. No assistants, no security, no polished armor, just a tired face trying to disappear into the crowd while her chest tightened with the kind of loneliness that doesn't make a sound until it finally does, until it spills out of your eyes and makes your throat ache and your shoulders shake. And still no one stopped, not the suits with their lanyards, not the tourists with their cameras, not the teens laughing into their screens. Not the man with a violin case who walked by as if crying was contagious, because when people are rushing they convince themselves empathy is a luxury item. But then a tiny hand tugged at another tiny hand, and the smallest voice asked the question adults forget how to ask: Daddy, why is that lady crying? And Travis Shields felt his daughter Nina squeeze his fingers like she could anchor herself to him in a world that kept taking things away. And they were standing on the platform waiting for the Brooklyn train, pressed between strangers and luggage and stale air. And Travis did what exhausted fathers do when they're terrified their kids will inherit their fear. He tried to make the truth smaller. Sometimes people have hard days, sweetheart. Sometimes people just hurt. And Nina's blue eyes stayed locked on the bench as if her gaze alone could hold that woman together. And then she asked, like you. And the words hit him because he had been trying so hard to hide it. The brokenness. The way grief lives inside you like an unpaid bill, always due, always accumulating interest. And he swallowed and admitted, yeah, like me sometimes. And he hoped that would be the end of it. Hoped they'd step onto the train, and the day would move on in its usual rhythm of appointments and penny counting, and pretending he wasn't drowning. But Nina's face pinched into that serious little expression she got when she was deciding something important. The expression that looked so much like Alina it almost made him flinch. And she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. And Travis's stomach fell because he knew exactly what that money was. Not spare change. Not an extra, not something that wouldn't be missed. It was her book money, the money he'd scraped together from bottles and cans. The money she'd been talking about for 2 days straight because 5-year-olds don't just want things. They want the dream of them, the choosing, the ownership, the proof that tomorrow might contain something pleasant. And Travis started to protest Nina. What are you? But her small boots were already clicking across the tile with determined purpose. And in that split second, he hesitated the way a man hesitates when he's watching his child do something noble that will cost them. Because he didn't want to crush her kindness. But he also didn't know how to survive if kindness kept spending what little they had. And he followed her with his mouth dry, caught between stopping her and letting the world teach her what he couldn't bear to teach her himself, that most people won't be saved by strangers. And the woman on the bench looked up as Nina approached. And up close Travis realized she wasn't old or frail the way he'd assumed from a distance. She was young, early 30s maybe, but worn in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with carrying too much alone. Her cheeks wet, her eyes red, her hands clenched as if she was trying to physically hold her insides from spilling out. And Nina's voice stayed steady because kids don't know how to be politely distant. Excuse me, are you okay? And Paige blinked at her like she hadn't been spoken to as a human being in a very long time, like she'd been reduced to a headline and a balance sheet, and a rumor for so many years that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be approached without an agenda. And for a moment Travis expected the automatic response, I'm fine, thank you. The lie adults offer as a courtesy, but Paige's throat tightened and the truth came out raw, not really. But that's okay, sometimes people aren't okay. And Nina nodded as if this was a serious fact that deserved respect, and then she opened her small palm and held out the crumpled bill like it was a warm coin from her heart. This is for you, to help you feel better. And Paige stared at the money as if it were the most dangerous thing in the world, because she had spent a decade learning to read people's hands, what they were reaching for, and no one ever reached for her without wanting something, and her instinct was to refuse, to protect herself. "I can't take your money, sweetheart," but Nina's face tightened with the fierce logic of children. "But I want you to have it." And Travis finally reached them, embarrassed and protective, already preparing apologies, and Nina kept going before he could interrupt. "My daddy says when people have hard days sometimes they need help, and I was going to buy a book but I have lots of books already, and you look like you need this more." And then her expression shifted into something older than 5. Something with a shadow in it, and she added in a softer voice, "My mommy always said kindness costs nothing but it's worth everything. She's in heaven now, but I still remember." And Travis watched Paige's defenses crack, as if that sentence had found the exact seam in her armor. Because grief recognizes grief like a secret language. And Paige's eyes filled again, but these tears were different. Not the empty tears of isolation, but the stunned tears of someone being seen. And she whispered, "What's your name?" And Nina said proudly, "Nina Shields, but everyone calls me Na, and that's my daddy." And Travis stepped forward, hands shoved in the pockets of his broken jacket, suddenly aware of how poor he looked under the harsh station lights, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt under Paige's gaze. And he tried to do the responsible adult thing. "I'm so sorry, Nina. You can't just give your money to strangers." But Nina lifted her chin. "But she needed it, Daddy." And Paige stopped him with a quiet voice that carried a strange kind of authority despite her plain clothes. "It's fine." And she looked at the crumpled bill like it was a key to a door she'd forgotten existed. "She's remarkable." And Travis said the only truth he had. "She gets it from her mother." And then the announcement echoed through the station about the Brooklyn line. And Travis gently took Nina's hand and said they had a doctor appointment. And Paige stood and wiped her face and said, "Me too. I mean, I'm going that direction." And something unspoken slid between them, a question neither dared to ask yet. And they ended up in the same train car because fate has a sense of humor. And because sometimes the universe puts you in a seat beside the person who will change your life just to see if you'll notice. And Nina claimed the window seat immediately and began narrating the city like she was hosting a documentary, pointing at graffiti and pigeons and reflections in dark tunnel glass. And Travis apologized again for the $5. And Paige told him to stop. And he caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, not like a stranger scanning another commuter, but like someone trying to understand what kind of man produces a child who hands away her last bill with a solemn face. And Paige introduced herself as Paige, and Travis said Travis, and Nina abruptly joined the adult conversation to announce dinosaur facts with the confidence of a tiny professor. And Paige smiled a real smile that made Travis's chest feel strangely warm, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. And she asked Nina questions like she actually cared, not polite filler questions. And Nina beamed and answered with dramatic intensity. And for 20 minutes Travis watched his daughter glow in the attention of someone who listened as if every word mattered, and he felt something loosen in him, a knot he'd been carrying since Alina's funeral. And when Nina returned to the window, Paige spoke softly. "She's uncomplicated. She says what she means. She feels what she feels. There's no agenda." And Travis nodded because he knew exactly what she meant. Because adults always have subtext and fear and pride wrapped around their words. And then the train slowed and Paige gathered a simple canvas bag and said it was her stop. And Travis surprised himself by feeling disappointment, because it had been a long time since meeting anyone felt like anything other than one more task to manage. And Paige said goodbye to Nina with a voice that trembled just a little. "Thank you for seeing me." And Nina said, "I hope you feel happy soon." And Paige stepped off the train and walked down the platform, then stopped and looked back at them with an expression Travis couldn't read, a mix of longing and fear, like someone standing at the edge of a decision. And then she disappeared into the crowd, and it wasn't until the next stop that Nina tugged his sleeve and pointed at the seat where Paige had been sitting. And there was the canvas bag tucked against the window as if it had been left on purpose, and Travis grabbed it with his heart suddenly racing, scanning the platform through streaked glass. But Paige was gone, and Nina said solemnly, We should give it back. That's what good people do. And Travis nodded. I know, sweetheart. I just don't know how to find her. And the day kept moving because life doesn't pause for mysteries. And the clinic waiting room smelled like antiseptic pretending to be flowers. And Nena colored and hummed, while Travis stared at forms that felt like traps, medical history, insurance payment options. And the words that mattered most were the ones that always mattered most, cost, and the estimate sat there like a punch. And Travis's mind flashed back 2 years to a different hospital room where Alina's hand was so thin he'd been afraid to squeeze, where machines beeped and hope shrank day by day. And Alina had made him promise to take care of their girl and also to keep living. And Travis had managed the first promise in the bare minimum sense, keeping Nena fed and clothed and loved. But the second promise felt like asking a man to swim with stones tied to his ankles, because Alina's illness had drained everything: savings, stability, time. And then grief finished the job by stealing his focus and his performance and the patience of a job that wanted reliability more than humanity. And his boss had slid termination papers across a desk with a practiced apology. And Travis had signed because he didn't have energy to fight. And after that he'd taken whatever work he could: warehouse shifts, office cleaning, app gigs, 60 hours a week for barely enough rent. And now his daughter needed surgery for her hearing, fluid buildup, tubes, and the doctor's kind face told him they couldn't wait much longer or damage could become permanent. And Travis said he had 10,000 saved and needed 2 more, and the lie in that sentence wasn't the number. It was the confidence. Because he didn't know how to find 2,000 more without breaking something, skipping rent, taking a loan he couldn't repay, selling the last pieces of comfort they had. And he left the clinic with Nena's hand in his and the feeling of the world closing in. And that night after Nena fell asleep, Travis sat at the small kitchen table, staring at Paige's canvas bag like it might contain either salvation or trouble. And he'd been avoiding opening it because it felt intimate, like stepping into someone else's life without permission. But he unzipped it and found a wallet with no cash and an ID badge that didn't match the woman he'd met, because the photo showed Paige styled and polished, makeup perfect, hair neat, expression controlled. And on the back of the badge was a phone number. And the name Paige Ross meant nothing to Travis in that moment, because he didn't live in a world where CEOs were celebrities. He lived in a world of rent deadlines and grocery coupons. But something about that badge made his instincts prickle, and he dialed, and Paige answered on the third ring with a guarded hello. And Travis stumbled through explaining who he was and that they found her bag and wanted to return it. And there was a pause where he expected suspicion. But instead her voice warmed as if she'd been waiting for this call, and she said yes. She'd been careless. And then, before he could offer to mail it, she asked if he'd meet her at a cafe Saturday. And Travis should have said no because he didn't know her and because he didn't have time for new connections that could turn complicated. But he said yes because there was something about her that made him feel like the world had opened a door a crack. And when she asked him to bring Nena, his throat tightened with a strange emotion. And Saturday they walked into Cornerstone Coffee, a small warm place tucked between shops like a secret. And Paige was there in jeans and a soft sweater, looking ordinary on purpose. And Nena ran up and announced they brought her purse, and Daddy said we had to be responsible. And Paige smiled like she'd been starving and just tasted something sweet. And Travis slid into the seat across from her and suddenly noticed how worn his own clothes were, how survival clung to him like a smell. And they ordered hot chocolate for Nena and black coffee for Travis and tea for Paige. And their conversation started safe. Where do you live? How old is Nena? Does she like school? And Paige stayed vague about her life, saying tech and travel and nothing more. And Travis understood privacy because grief makes you guard what's left. And meanwhile Nena launched into dinosaur documentary commentary, and Paige asked sincere questions that made Nena glow. And when Nena wandered to the pastry case, Travis thanked Paige for actually listening. And Paige admitted she wasn't pretending. She really did want to know about velociraptors opening doors. And Travis laughed, a real laugh that surprised him, because it sounded like a part of him he thought was gone. And when Nena returned with a croissant request and a legal brief of reasons she deserved it, The moment felt so normal it almost hurt. And over the next 2 hours, the conversation deepened the way it does between people who recognize the same kind of loneliness in each other. And Travis found himself talking about Alina, not the cancer at first, but the person, the true crime podcasts, the kitchen dancing, the way her laugh filled a room. And he said losing her felt like someone rearranged the world while he wasn't looking. Everything looked the same, but nothing fit. And Paige went quiet and then told him she lost her parents at 15 in a house fire, came home from a school trip to nothing, no photos, no possessions, just an aunt who took her in reluctantly and cousins who resented her. And Travis heard the untold years in her voice, the untethered feeling, and without planning to, he told her about Nena's hearing problems and the surgery and the cost, and he stopped himself mid-sentence, embarrassed by emotion. But Paige reached across and touched his hand and said there was a difference between unloading and sharing. And when it was time to leave, Paige gave Nena a wrapped package as a thank you. And Nena tore it open to reveal a leather-bound journal with her name embossed. And Paige said it was for stories and secrets and drawings. And Nena's eyes widened at the idea of being worth engraving. And then Nena pulled out a lumpy crocheted bead chain she'd made with a neighbor and gave it to Paige, apologizing that it wasn't very good, but Daddy said first tries were special. And Paige took it like it was diamonds, eyes bright with tears she tried to hide, and whispered it was perfect and she would treasure it always. And they left that cafe with something delicate hanging between them, a connection that didn't feel like a transaction. And Travis went home feeling lighter and more afraid, because hope is terrifying when you've been surviving without it. And Paige went home and cried, not purely sad, not purely happy, but overwhelmed because she realized a wall she'd built for years had cracked. And that morning on the bench she hadn't meant to cry. She'd meant to escape, because an email about her aunt's annual family reunion had arrived, and she hadn't been invited in years. And the loneliness had hit her like it always did when old memories surfaced. And she'd come to Grand Central because it was the last place anyone would look for Paige Ross, CEO of Horizon Technologies, billionaire with a glass office 40 floors above Manhattan, because she wanted to be nobody for an hour, and she had learned over a decade to measure people by what they wanted from her, because her aunt and cousins had taught her that love could be conditional, because once Horizon became big, suddenly the family that resented her wanted loans and bailouts and favors, and she'd said yes for years out of terror of being alone. And then 5 years ago she finally said no, and they cut her off. And romance was no better because every partner eventually wanted the prestige or the access. And Paige decided being alone was safer than being used, until a child offered her $5 with no motive, and a father looked at her like she was a person worth knowing. And then Paige learned about the $12,000 surgery gap, and she knew she could close it in a breath, but she couldn't do it like that. Not directly, because Travis had pride, the good kind. And if she showed up with a check, she'd reduce the moment into a purchase. And Paige didn't want to buy his gratitude. She wanted to honor his humanity and Nena's kindness without poisoning it. So she used a shell foundation she already had for quiet interventions, made calls to find the best pediatric ear surgeon, set up full coverage, had a letter drafted with every word chosen carefully, informing Travis that Nena had been selected for full surgical coverage through a pediatric care initiative. And with one request, please tell Nena to spend her $5 on the book she wanted. She'll understand. And Paige approved it and then sat in her glass office touching the lumpy bead chain under her shirt, terrified she'd made the bravest or most cowardly decision of her life. And when the letter arrived, Travis nearly threw it away as junk mail until something made him open it. And he read the words and dropped to the kitchen floor and cried, because relief can make your legs stop working. And the $5 line told him it had to be Paige, and he tried calling her, and it went to voicemail, and he left messages he didn't know how to shape, gratitude mixed with confusion, and Paige didn't answer, not because she didn't want to hear his voice, but because hearing it made her want more than she trusted herself to have, because answering meant explaining, and explaining meant revealing who she really was, and she had watched too many eyes change when people learned her net worth. watched warmth turn calculating, watched connection become opportunity, and she believed Travis was different, but belief wasn't proof, and fear is a skilled liar. So she let the calls ring out and told herself disappearing was kinder than risking the moment turning into a transaction. And then the surgery happened and it was perfect. Nena's hearing preserved. One night in the hospital, charming nurses, Travis sleeping in a chair beside her, gratitude so heavy it felt like guilt. And he called Paige again and again, and she still didn't answer. And weeks passed, and Travis tried to convince himself it was fine. She had done a good thing and wanted no thanks. But it hurt more than he expected because he had felt something in that cafe, a possibility. And he was tired of losing possibilities. And then one day, after a follow-up appointment, Nena saw the cornerstone sign and pulled him inside because children believe the world is kinder than it is. And there, at the same corner table, was Paige, and Paige looked up, and for one unguarded moment her face opened with relief and longing and fear. And then she reached for her bag to flee like she always did. But Nena was faster, sprinting across the cafe and hugging her hard. "I missed you. Where did you go?" And Paige's hands trembled as she hugged back and whispered apologies she couldn't finish. And Travis approached and sat down and said softly, "It was you." And Paige closed her eyes and admitted yes. And Travis asked why she disappeared, and Paige's voice broke as she confessed the truth. Because she was afraid. Because people always wanted something. Because Nena and Travis had seen her without knowing who she was, and she couldn't bear the thought of watching their eyes change. And then she took a breath and said her real name and her real role, and the word billionaire, like it was a confession of something shameful. And Travis sat with it, then reached across the table and took her hand and said the simplest thing that cracked her open: "I'm not everyone." And he told her what he cared about. Not her money, not her company, but the human moments, the bench, the dinosaur questions, the way she held a lumpy bead like treasure. And Paige stared at him as if he'd offered her a new physics, and her tears spilled. And Nena looked up from sugar packets and asked why everyone was crying, and Travis laughed through his own tears and told her it was a happy day. And they took it slow after that, because trust doesn't rebuild overnight when it's been burned down repeatedly. And Paige started showing up for small things: pancakes in a cramped apartment, walks in the park with Nena narrating every dog and leaf, movie nights on a lumpy couch where no one cared about quarterly reports. And Travis kept his promise and treated Paige like a person, not a pedestal, not a purse. And Paige learned what that felt like, and it was wonderful and terrifying. And their first real argument arrived when Travis mentioned the landlord raising rent like it was weather, and Paige offered to cover it without thinking. And Travis's voice turned firm no. And Paige was stunned because she had spent a lifetime solving problems with money and being thanked for it. And Travis explained that if she paid his rent, the relationship would become something else, that his pride mattered, that he needed to handle his own bills. And Paige wanted to argue that money meant nothing compared to love. But she saw the line in his face and realized this wasn't about ego. It was about dignity. So she said okay and learned the hardest lesson of her life: that sometimes supporting someone means letting them struggle while you sit beside them. And Travis had his own learning curve too, because accepting care without feeling purchased takes practice when you've been poor long enough to associate gifts with debt. And he learned the difference between charity and love, learned to accept museum tickets when Paige framed it as time together instead of money spent, learned to say yes without shame. And Paige learned to hold back her instinct to hire tutors and fix everything and turn every worry into a solved spreadsheet. Because Travis wanted Nena to be a kid, not a project. And Travis's groundedness anchored Paige in a world where presence mattered more than perfection. And then one evening Travis came home with an expression Paige had never seen: excitement and disbelief. A real job offer, logistics coordinator in Queens with benefits. And he looked at Paige and asked directly if she had helped behind the scenes because he needed to know his success was his. And Paige said no with a steady voice, because she had fought that temptation daily. And Travis believed her, and his shoulders loosened, and he smiled like a man stepping back onto solid ground. And they celebrated with pizza and sparkling cider, and a glitter card that would haunt the carpet for months. And Paige realized she was falling in love. Not with security or status, but with this man who refused to be bought and still let her in. And 6 months after the bench, Paige stunned her board by stepping back from day-to-day operations at Horizon, not abandoning it but making room for the rest of her life. And analysts wrote confused think pieces and executives panicked, and Paige didn't care. Because she was finally learning that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. And she started showing up to school plays and parent conferences, crying in the front row when Nina delivered 3 lines as tree number 2. And Paige loved it, loved the smallness of it because it wasn't small. It was real. And one night walking home from the play, Travis thanked her for choosing a life that probably looked tiny compared to what she had. And Paige stopped and told him what she really had before: galas full of people who wanted something, boardrooms full of smiles that hid knives, an apartment with a view and no one to share it with. And she squeezed his hand and said this wasn't smaller. It was everything. And a year after that first platform moment, Travis planned to propose at the exact bench where Nina had offered her $5. Because some places become sacred not because they are beautiful but because they are the birthplace of a new life. And he bought a simple ring, not expensive, but honest, and brought Paige there on a Saturday morning with Nina vibrating with secret excitement. And Travis dropped to one knee with his heart hammering, telling Paige he couldn't give her fancy vacations or match her old world, but he could give her a life where she was seen and chosen and never had to hide. And Nina erupted from behind a pillar yelling "say yes" like a tiny choir director. And Paige cried and laughed and said yes, yes, yes. And the ring slid onto her finger like it belonged there. And their wedding was small on purpose. 30 people in a garden upstate, no press, no networking, just chosen family. And Nina scattered petals with aggressive enthusiasm and announced her spiral technique was advanced. And Paige's vows spoke of a year ago when she'd been invisible on a bench and a child had given her everything she had. And Travis's vows said she didn't save them. She joined them. And he spoke Alina's name with tenderness, saying Alina would have loved how Paige listened to dinosaur facts and kept trying to cook rice even when she burned it. And when they kissed, Nina cheered loud enough to make guests laugh through tears. And 5 years later, Travis stood in the doorway of their Brooklyn brownstone, watching the chaos of an ordinary Tuesday. Walls covered in Nina's artwork and photos of a life built day by day. A home that wasn't ostentatious but real. Scuffed floors and crayon marks, and a backyard where their rescue dog barked at squirrels like it was his job. Nina 10 now with perfect hearing, and a heart too big for her chest, running a kindness club at school, raising money for families who couldn't afford medical care, telling reporters it all started with $5 and 2 moms. One in heaven who taught her kindness costs nothing but is worth everything, and one here who taught her it's never too late to invest in people. And Paige came up behind Travis that evening and wrapped her arms around his waist, still wearing the lumpy crocheted bead under her shirt, alongside a crooked preschool clay heart their son Julian had made. Julian 3, and obsessed with trucks and drawing on any surface he could reach. And Paige asked what Travis was thinking, and Travis said he was thinking about that bench and what would have happened if Nina hadn't looked up and seen a stranger crying. And Paige whispered they would have missed each other and missed everything. And from the living room, Nina shouted that Julian drew on the wall again, and Julian protested it was art. And the dog barked at a vacuum no one even turned on. And Travis smiled because his life was loud and messy and nothing like he planned. His wife a billionaire who still couldn't cook rice without burning it. His daughter trying to save the world $5 at a time. His son treating walls like canvases. And it was perfect because it was home, and it began with a tiny hand holding a crumpled bill and a truth adults forget, that the smallest kindness can crack open the hardest heart, expose secrets worth billions, and rewrite not one life but 3. And if this story stirred something in you, don't let it end where it started. Pass it along, because sometimes sharing hope is the kindest thing we can do.